with a pen, and as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, just jot it down, and then we will go through the questions at the very end. But hopefully some of your questions will be answered during the presentation. We're just waiting for Richard to get the recording started. Okay. So thank you everybody who came today, and those of you who are joining by Zoom. I hope this is helpful and useful. I am going to go through, as the title says, tips and tricks to successful IRB clinical research protocols, some of the things that I've learned as a clinical research programs manager throughout the last 4 years. So I hope that this will be helpful to you. I'm going to go to the next slide here. My first slide is on the types of clinical research. So I'm sure if you've ever submitted a protocol before or have been added to one, have done anything with protocols, you've heard some of the terms: full committee review, what is greater than minimal risk, what is less than minimal risk, what is minimal risk. These are all terms that IRB throws around. So I want to dispel the myth a little bit about these things. The levels of review comprise of 3 different areas. The first is greater than minimal risk, or what's considered full committee review. Full committee reviews are for studies that have, usually studies that have interventions or are invasive. So when you're talking about treatment, so related to BLI, our full committee review protocols are ones that have biopsies on them. So that gives you an idea. And then there are, under the minimal risk categories, there's 2 different areas. There's one called exempt, and there's another one called expedited. And these words, you would think exempt means that you don't have to have IRB review, but that's not the case. And expedited does not mean that it goes faster. So what they actually mean, I'm not going to go into total detail because it's a lot of things that go under either of those categories, but I wanted to let you know that there are federal definitions for what's an exempt research study and what's an expedited research study. So when you go to submit a brand new IRB protocol, I tend to err on the side of just say that it's minimal risk and let them decide. If the IRB thinks that it needs to be full committee review, then they'll push it towards that. But if you already know that it's greater than minimal risk, so say that you have a biopsy or you're doing some sort of laser treatment on the protocol, then you do want to submit it through full committee review, and I'll tell you the reason why when I get to the next part. There is a, yes?
Is this being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Oh, great, okay.
So there is another thing that is truly exempt in the sense that you would think it's exempt, and that's what's called a self-determination of exemption. So we have actually 2 or 3 at BLI faculty who've gone this way, and these are studies that you really feel like it's so minimal risk and that maybe it doesn't need IRB review, and that's exactly what it means, that it's not going to go through IRB review. But what IRB does require is you start out as a new protocol, and then there's like a little checklist. And under that checklist, there is an option of selecting self-determination of exemption. And you answer all of the questions, and if the questions are yes for all those that qualify for self-exemption, then you don't have to go through IRB review. But this stays on their protocol site, and it's an official determination by the IRB that you don't have to go through a review. That still means that the lead researcher is responsible for making sure that their study team is trained with the human subjects research, training, and keeping consent forms and all sorts of things. It still applies, but it's only the researcher's responsibility. There was a question, I'm sure you might all have questions about timelines and deadlines. So this is where I'm gonna come back to the full committee review, because they've changed things in the last couple of years to make it less of an administrative burden. So it used to be that even with minimal risk studies, they have specific deadlines that you had to meet, but they don't do that anymore. They do still do that for full committee reviews or what they consider greater than minimal risk. And there is a calendar on the website that has deadlines. So there's going to be a deadline for if you want, because the committee meets only once a month. Well, there's two committees that meet once a month. So if you want to meet that, get your protocol on the agenda for that meeting, you have to submit it, I believe, 2 weeks before in order to make sure that it goes through pre-review by the IRB analyst and then gets on the agenda. If you miss that submission deadline, it will not get on the agenda for that corresponding review date. So it's really, really important that if you know that it's going to need full committee review, that you know what the deadlines are and plan accordingly. There are two biomedical IRB review committees. There's one that's called A, one that's called B. Doesn't really matter which one you get on. The deadlines are different because they meet at different times. That's what's important to know. But there's another reason why you might want to know which one you're assigned to, and I'll get into that a little bit later. On the website, it says that final approval is about 7 weeks. What I was told just recently by Jessica Sheldon, who's the director of IRB, so I'm pretty sure it's reliable information, that it's 4 weeks until they even look at it. Okay, so you really want to just get it in as soon as possible if you're running against a deadline or you want to start your project as soon as possible, because they will let it sit in queue for up to 4 weeks before they even look at it, even for pre-review. So it's really important for you to keep that consideration in mind. I just listed the last two 2023 deadlines. Oops, yes. I don't know why January 2023. They have not yet posted the 2024 dates. So I provided a link here, and again, if you weren't here earlier, I will provide these slides with all of the links. Minimal risk works differently, and actually this is a majority of BOI studies will go through minimal risk, and these are rolling deadlines. So daily, it's called subcommittee meetings once a week. It's not necessarily on a certain day of the week because it depends on the availability of the committee members, but I found that generally they meet on Thursdays. And it's really important for you to communicate with the analyst who is pre-reviewing your protocols, because they can tell you. And they're very, very friendly. They don't bite. They want to help us. So that's, if you walk away with one tip, that is to elicit the help of the IRB. That's what they're there for. So avoiding delays. These are the things that I advise for you to consider. Get it in the queue as soon as possible, even though you don't think your protocol is perfect. Just get it in, because you can always make changes. And if there's something wrong, they will find it in the review. So then you can correct it at that time. So this is a nice thing about the online protocol. It took us a while to get used to it, but one of the things that I really like about this system is it's pretty easy to make changes. And a lot of times I put it into queue and then we forgot something. Like, oh no, we forgot to add this very, very important person that needs to be on it. Then I would go and check out who's actually reviewing it, and I would email that person and say, can you return it so that I can add this other person? And they're happy to do that, because again, 4 weeks until they actually look at it, right? So you can ask them to return it, and once they return it, it doesn't have to be the lead researcher that submits it. It can be anybody who has full access to the protocol. So that's also good to keep in mind. There is one thing that I do want you to consider when it's a brand new protocol. It needs to go through what they call ancillary review. It needs director approval, so it'll sit there until the director pushes the button to push it forward to the IRB. Right now, I have director approval delegate access, so I'm the one that's actually pushing it through. Whoever takes my position will do that moving forward. Know who is actually reviewing the protocol. So if you've seen the IRB protocol, and I'll show it a little bit later, there is a tab on the top that says activity log, and it logs everything that happens in that protocol. So if you screen down, it shows you not only what you did, but who did it. So you can look to say, oh, Elise Flores, who's one of the analysts, actually went in and did A, B, and C. So she's the person that I'm gonna email if I need the protocol returned to me, or if I have any questions about how long this is going to take, or if you have an NIH grant that is pending IRB approval, then that's the person I'm gonna bug about getting this done as soon as possible. So this leads me to what I've already mentioned, follow up, check in. They have created this online link so that we can find out where they are in the status. There's a section in there that has admin notes, and they often put notes in there, who's reviewing it, where they are, if it's been tabled for the next review. All of that information is available to us. They're very transparent about that. Another tip that I want to give is that you want to respond. When you get those IRB emails, and everybody who has full access to the protocol will get an email every time something happens, except for the submit button. They don't tell you when it's submitted. You got to go back and check. So you can respond as soon as you receive an email. So if they review it, they did a pre-review, and they have some questions for you. They need you to clarify some things or add something more. That's what the pre-review is all about, so that when it goes to subcommittee review, it can go through pretty quickly, because you don't want to have to wait a whole nother week. So what I have found is that analysts do a really good job about nitpicking about every little thing. It might seem annoying to you, but you're thankful when it goes to that committee review and it just gets approved, right? So that's what we want. And when you get that email, you should respond as soon as possible. Don't see that they put some random deadline date, but don't pay attention to that. Just put it back in as soon as you can so that they can work on it. All right, so one of the things that you want to be mindful of is on the protocol, there is a tab that says study team. And I wanted to share a little bit about what study team on the protocol means versus what study team might mean to the lead researcher. There are many people who may work on the actual research project. That doesn't mean that every single person works on the human subjects portion. And even those who are working on the human subjects portion, not everybody needs to be listed on the protocol. So let me go through that. When you see study team as a tab on the IRB protocol, that means that those are a list of researchers that IRB wants to know about, that IRB will be tracking. And so the lead researcher needs to determine who is important to the protocol that needs to be on the list. And one of the things that I wanted to go over, and I'm going to share it with you in a little bit, but I'm going to pass out. I only made one copy because it's online. Erin, are you in here? Where did Erin go?
She was at the back.
Oh, okay. There was, maybe right behind you, Jan.
Yeah.
There's a table that's colorful that has yellow, and I'm going to show this in a slide for the Zoom people soon. Yes. So if you can start passing that around to people, that is what they call a key personnel list. It tells you when somebody needs to be listed on the protocol for IRB review. And they give you terms of co-researchers and research personnel. It's a loose definition, and a lot of times the lead researchers can decide who is a co-researcher versus research personnel. And the reason why is when you're looking at minimal risk protocols, the IRB does not want you to list anybody on the protocol that is considered research personnel. So co-researchers are people who have a significant contributions in the sense of the actual research procedures and in the data interpretation. So the lead researcher needs to decide. Sometimes the faculty will say, my undergrad student is pretty much running this study for me. So that person on the protocol is going to be one of the co-researchers. But you have somebody who's kind of sort of working on the protocol, but they're only doing device stuff. They're not intersecting with the subjects or anything like that. You might decide they don't need to be on the protocol at all, and they're considered research personnel. All right. Anybody who has anything to do with the human subjects portion of the study has to do the city training. Whether you're on the protocol or not, you have to do the city training. And it's the lead researcher's responsibility, the PI's responsibility to help make sure that that's done. Of course, our faculty are very, very busy. And so their lab managers really should be helping to make sure that everybody who needs the training is trained. That was a role that I took on with student help. I actually have a spreadsheet of everybody who the faculty have told me is supposed to be on a specific research study, and we're tracking their training to make sure if it's expired. If you're a co-researcher and you're on the study team, that on the actual protocol, then the protocol is linked to the city training. So it'll tell us when your training has expired or if you don't have training. Like Alejandra has seen, there's a bunch of people who don't even have training. But you have to take the protocol with a grain of salt. And the reason why is this because it's really glitchy. Sometimes it'll tell you that the training has expired when it actually hasn't expired. Or sometimes it will tell you that they haven't done the training at all. So it takes a little bit of investigative work. Sometimes if you've done the study team, there's a little, if it's been submitted, there's a little eyeball on there next to every person. If you click on that, it'll open it up and you'll be able to see whether or not they've done the training. So it doesn't, maybe it might not show on the actual table, but if you open it up, drill down to it, then you can actually see the training has been done. Sometimes there was an instance where the training didn't show at all. So there's two reasons why the training doesn't show at all. Of course, the obvious is that they didn't do the training, or they don't have a, what's the word? They don't have a city login, basically. But I've also found that sometimes if you don't have your UCI emails, sometimes we have people who come from other places. If you don't have your UCI email as your primary email in your city training, then it's not gonna link to the protocol. It's really important to know when you're working with investigators that, because a lot of you work with chalk investigators, or there might be affiliates with UCI, and they might have a Google Mail or something else that's their primary. If their training is not showing, please make sure that they check to make sure that UCI email is their primary. One of the things that I found looking through protocol when you're submitting a brand new one is that you're entering people in the study team, but you're not drilling down and filling out all the information in there. So please make sure that you're opening up every person, making sure you're filling in all of the information that's required, including describing what their additional research procedures are and specifying the relevant training. If you have an MD that's on your protocol and it's really hard to track them down to say, can you fill out this information? I did this recently with Dr. Boffinek's protocol. I just Googled them And I put that they're board certified in whatever specialty area that you need their training in, and that's all they need, really. They just need to know they're qualified to do what you're saying that they are doing. You need to know your funding source. So you gotta go back to your PI or check in with Alan and Jan to know which fund is funding this study. NIH, it's really important to know that if it's an NIH fund, especially if you're urgent, because that is the one reason why that they expedite actually means they will hurry it up, is if NIH is waiting for IRB approval in order to release the funds. They will need, I was just told that they need something from the program official from NIH that says actually that we need this to be approved in order to release the funds. Then IRB will move up from 4 weeks to 2 weeks until they start reviewing it. DOD, it's important to know when it's a DOD, there's an extra form that you need to complete. It's just a checklist that the IRB needs. You need to know that DOD will not approve it until UCI IRB approves it. So it's really important that UCI IRB knows when you have DOD funding that's pending because of your review. And they're gonna keep asking you, what's DOD approval? And you could just say, I can't give you DOD approval until you approve it. So, and they don't need you to upload it, they just need to know that it's been approved. Additional reviews. Most of our protocols are what's called investigator-initiated protocols. That means that the alternative is when you have an industry sponsor and they give you a master protocol and you just have to follow it. Most of our protocols are not that. So when it is an investigator-initiated protocol, there is an additional step that IRB makes us go through. It's called an external scientific review. The external scientific review is bypassed if there is what they call a peer review, an external peer review. That usually only happens if you have an NIH-funded study, because NIH is peer reviewed. So all other protocols, including DOD-funded studies, have to go through our UCI internal review, which is done by ICTS, IRB, or BIRD. So we need to make sure that that goes in. IRB will make sure that that happens, but if you're in a hurry, you can try to contact somebody over at ICTS to expedite that review. They will do it simultaneously, but IRB will not start their review, I have found, until BIRD has given their okay. Another review on the side is Cancer Center. So if you have cancer-related projects, then Cancer Center also does their own review. And then COI, conflict of interest. On the study team, if any of the study team members have disclosable financial interest, then it goes through that another layer, and that takes a really long time, but they can do that in the background while IRB is working on the protocol. And again, all these people, find out who's doing the review and bug them if you need it, review quickly. I wanted to go through a little bit about the consent forms because this is an area where I find a lot of mistakes, or I also see the IRB analysts coming back and asking for changes. You're supposed to use lay language. You can't just cut and paste what you put in the protocol into a consent form. It technically needs to be at an 8th grade reading level. So what I've seen that the IRB analysts will say is when you're using a lot of scientific jargon, you need to translate that into something that somebody like me who doesn't have a scientific degree will understand. So make sure when you're writing the consent forms that it's readable to somebody who's not studying to be a PhD or already has one. Consistent with the protocol. So just make sure that when you say that there are 7 study visits and you change it in the protocol, that you go back to the consent form and change it. That's going to cause delays because they're going to find that error. The medical care language, that's one of the optional phrases. This medical care language is for if you're planning to enroll any UCI patient, they have a medical record in Epic. And so we actually look at medical records, a lot of the MDs will look at their lab results, things like that. So that's why we need that medical care language in there. If you don't know for sure, you can go ahead and put it in. I think it's better to have it in there than to regret it later for not having it. Another reason why I've been recommending that researchers put that in is because we've been trying to put all of our studies in Encore. And Encore is I'm not gonna talk a whole lot about that, but it's a online record system for tracking enrollment. And they have created that to help with talking to the electronic medical record system. So a lot of our subjects are not in the electronic medical system, but it's still a very useful tool. So it's nice to have that option to be able to utilize that. DOD, anything with DOD, they've said there's a section in the consent form that says, what happens if I'm injured? And the option is to put University of California that's responsible or the study sponsor. If it's anybody but DOD, you could write in the sponsor name. Like you can say sponsor NIH. But DOD doesn't like them to be in that. So if you have DOD funding, just leave it as UCI and get rid of the sponsor language there. They've had me go back and change that several times. There's another section that says, do you have clinicaltrials.gov? Clinicaltrials.gov is a site that NIH, the federal government, runs. And it used to be that we had to register all of our protocols, but now we only register them for two reasons. It's NIH, we have NIH funding, and they specifically tell us in the award letter that it needs to be registered on clinicaltrials.gov. So again, you need to check with the C&G team to see if that's in the award letter. Otherwise, we're not going to register it. Or if you're planning to publish in a medical journal, there are specific lists of medical journals that if you want to publish in it, they require you to register in clinicaltrials.gov. So that would be the other reason. Certificate of confidentiality is a new thing. This applies to all NIH funded studies. So if there is NIH funding, then this language needs to be in the consent form. One thing that I mentioned, it probably doesn't go in here, but in the protocol, in the consent form section, you could check off paper consent form or electronic consent form. I've been advising that you select both. And the reason why is with the pandemic, a lot of us were given the option to do DocuSign as a way to consent people who are not in the office. And I've also seen that sometimes when we've consented them incorrectly, there's some things that are missing in the consent form. It's really nice to be able to go back to them if you're not expecting that person to be physically present in the near term, to go back and send a DocuSign so that you can have a correctly administered consent form on file if IRB ever came back to audit. So I would, when you go in for an amendment or if you have a new protocol, to check the electronic as an optional backup and then put in DocuSign. Renewals. I just wanted to give you a few tips and tricks about renewals. One of the things that you will know if you read their manual, but not all of us go in and read the manual. They have, this is a glitch in their system, but if you look at the side where there's a renew and amend, there's an amend. You never click on renew by itself. It doesn't work. It doesn't go to the IRB. It's a glitch in the system. So if you do a renew and you put in all your good information, all you can do is abandon it and start all over. with the renew and amend. The good news is you still can access the abandoned one, so you can transfer over, you don't lose what you put in, but you still have to manually go in and put it in again. So don't go there in the first place, hit renew and amend, even if you don't have an amendment, which is another thing that I wanted to go in. If you do have an amendment, it is good and encouraged to do it at the time of renewal. If you've been here a very long time, then it used to be that IRB would say you could only make certain amendments at the time of renewal. Usually if you're adding somebody or removing somebody, they discourage you from making any other amendments. That has changed with the new protocol system. They actually want you to put in amendments at that time and reduce the number of amendments that go, or transactions that go into the system. So go ahead and think about how many, if there are any amendments that you want to make at the time of renewal, go ahead and do it. And I always put in there that they're what's the word? It's minimal, or they're not significant changes. They can determine that if they want to. Translations. If you have a new translation, then it doesn't have to go through. This is the only reason that I have been told that IRB accepts it as an administrative review only, is a translation. So it doesn't have to go to for review. So if you find that you need a Spanish consent form for a minimal risk study, or even actually full committee review, there's a difference in the type of translations. But if you have a translation, you can go ahead and submit it as an amendment and then click administrative review, and they'll turn it around probably within a week. And what happens is, if you're in a real hurry, just email that person that's working on it. I usually go to the person in charge in that situation, and I'll go through who's in charge of certain areas and let them know, we need this ASAP. Can you just review it? They don't even look at it, really. They just hit approved. Because, I mean, they don't speak Spanish. What are they going to do? All you need for translations is, if it's a minimal risk study, then you just need a native speaker to translate it. So we have in-house Spanish native speakers. We have in-house Vietnamese native speakers. I'm sure we have other languages that I don't know about. All we need, all IRB wants is a letter it doesn't need a letterhead or anything like that, that is dated and says, I am a native speaker and I translated this document. If it's a greater than minimal risk study, that's different. You need a certified translator, and in that sense, that costs usually about $500 or more, but Medical Center does offer that, or UC campus does offer that if it's needed. IRB, I call them my friends because they are very, very helpful, and everyone is super duper nice. And they have office hours, which I really hope that you'll take advantage of. Almost every single day there is somebody. Now they have different areas of expertise. I like Monday at 9 a.m. because Jessica Sheldon is there, and she's probably the only one that hardly ever says, let me get back to you, because she knows the ins and outs of all of the rules. She also can make exceptional approvals. So that's good to know. She's the director, directs. She's a director. Full committee review, Cherie Dubois, she's amazing and super helpful and super responsive. I've never gone more than 4 hours without her responding to an email. Raksha is also very helpful. She's IRB B administrator. And the minimal risk people that you want to know are Melissa Camarena and Will Kettler. They're very knowledgeable and super helpful. And Reliance is Valerie Sanchez. Anything Reliance, she'll get back to you right away. Does anybody have a question on Reliance? Do you know what that is? Okay.
I don't know what it is.
Okay. Reliance means, it's also called single IRB. Reliance means that if you're working with an institute outside of UCI and they have an IRB protocol and you're being put under that IRB, you're just a site under their approved research, then UCI will rely on University of Michigan's IRB protocol. And all we need to do with that one, it's pretty quick review. They just need the approved paperwork from their side. And you actually use their protocol as, I believe you use their consent form, but we use our own UCI HIPAA document to make sure that we know it's not their HIPAA, it's our HIPAA. Here's where I will go through a little bit more of those who are on Zoom. You can get a better look at this key personnel information. It's called the research heat map. And it has all the information that you need on there. Any questions on this? I won't go over this in detail. Okay. I will mention that Jessica told me recently that IRB considers the co-researcher definition as the same definition of what NIH considers a senior or key personnel, which usually is a faculty or project scientist. However, at BLI, I have seen, again, repeating myself, that anybody who is significantly involved in the study design or procedures or analysis, if the faculty member wants to consider an undergraduate researcher as a significant person on that, that's up to you. You can decide that. Okay, so I'm showing you a little bit of what the protocol, you will see on the protocol. When a researcher is not on the study team, I have mentioned that the lead researcher is responsible for, number one, that the training is done and is renewed every year, and that you are tracking them. It used to be that we had to keep I think Erin has the hard copy of it, an actual word table. They've never updated it. It's totally ancient, to list all of the research personnel that are not on the protocol. You're supposed to track them. This is what my student who helps me uses to track all of your personnel. But again, we won't know to track them unless you tell us. And with the new protocol website, there's a section called permissions, which is so nice because anybody who already has full access to the protocol can add people onto the permissions tab. The permissions tab means that you have access to the protocol, but you're not necessarily on the protocol. And you can determine if that person has full access or can only view the protocol. So this is a really good way to track people and multiple people instead of passing around a Word doc and trying to update the Word doc. It's really burdensome to do that. So if you know that a research personnel is being, new person is added to your senior design team, you can add them on here to remind yourself that, oh, this person is working on the protocol. And when they're gone, it's super easy to just remove them. So this is a really good way. On the actual protocol, it says, are you tracking your team on a study team log, or are you tracking your team on the permissions tab? I always put permissions tab, so just make sure that that's updated as you go. These are additional tabs that a lot of people don't realize. The activity log is what I mentioned earlier. You can go there to see what has happened in the protocol and who's been working on it. There's also this nice little tab down at the bottom corner on the left side, your left side, that says selected version. You can see every version of the protocol, and this is where you can go. If you had to abandon a protocol, you can go there. You can also compare versions, which is kind of cool. If you had to abandon one and you want to compare which version, I actually added stuff. And then I also highlighted the right-hand corner there, the list of tabs where it says amend, again, renew, no renew, renew, amend. Action item summary, it's a tab where the IRB analyst will go in and they'll put little notes and you can see what they've done. And sometimes they will, if they want you to work on something, put in notes in admin notes and file and tell you to go there. And that's where they will attach a consent form where they may track changes and comments of what they want you to revise. And if you're ready to close the document, okay, here's another thing, I didn't talk about closing. If your study is completed, that means that you're not going to access any more PHI, so subject identifiable information, your publications are all done, and you're ready to close the document. You can let it expire, or you could request to close it. I would prefer if you requested to close it and give a final progress report, because if we ever need to go back and look at things, it's really nice to have that as a reference. So don't let it expire, physically, manually close it. And the print tab is nice because you can create a PDF version of it with the print tab. I wanted to let you know, this is more post-approval. And I wanted to go over this a little bit because these are some of the mistakes that I see as I review consent forms when you give them to me. And they're pretty easy to fix, so I want you to know ahead of time. When you are consenting subjects, that signature page, I don't know how many consent forms I have seen that is missing a date, the person didn't print their name. You think it's not that big of a deal, but IRB does consider that a big deal. And then making sure that the date that the subject puts in is the same date that the person authorizing that consent, obtaining the consent signs. The dates have to match. If you ever forget, it happens. If you do forget and you have to go back and get them to sign it or put their name or whatever, make sure that they're putting in the date that you had them actually sign it, not the date that they were supposed to sign it. That's what the IRB wants. The HIPAA only needs a subject to date and sign it. There is a witness section. The only time you need a witness section is if somebody was there to translate for them, say that mom is a subject in the study and their adult child is translating for them, then you can have that child sign the witness portion. This is also a biggie. A lot of times when you have a minimal research subject, you might have a person come in multiple times. It's really, really important that your protocol specifically states that you may have a subject that was consented to a study for a one-time visit return for another visit, even though it's not written as multiple study visits in it. So you might have a minimal risk study that you don't have study visit 1, study visit 2, follow up, all of that. But you might want to have that person come back and say that I was a subject in a study, I was imaged on my right arm, but then I had something that might be imaged on my left arm. Even though that might be 2 different data points for you, I'm still one person and I'm still one enrollment. So that needs to be made clear to the research subject when you're consenting them that I may want to have you come back, and it needs to be in the consent form. Hope that makes sense. If you do end up re-consenting the subject, meaning that they're signing the consent form again, there's only 2 reasons why you would want to do that. If you enroll me in 2022, and then you want to bring me back to image another section of my arm in 2023, I need to sign a new consent form. But if you bring me back any time before that, I don't need to sign the consent form again, unless in that time frame there was an amendment to the protocol or to the consent form. And you need to make that very clear to the subject that whichever area was amended, so they know. And wrapping up, these are some really good resources that IRB has available. Any of these are very, very helpful. There's a frequently asked questions tab that I found to be very, very simple and laid out. And again, I will provide these to you. So do you have any questions?
So say that I amend my protocol because I'm adding or removing a core researcher or someone. Do I have to reconsent the subject? It's not really going to affect them.
That's a very good question. You only need to reconsent the subject if the consent form changed.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
1 year with consent, even my study has visit 1 and then visit 2 1 year later. I need to reconsent subject?
That's a good question. You do not. If your protocol already states that you are bringing that subject back and your consent form has not changed, then you do not need to reconsent them. This is only for one-time visit consent forms for subjects. When your consent says that it's a one-time visit, there's no follow-up involved.
It would be a whole year, so like if you consented somebody today, November 30th, and then it's not until the next
November 30th of 2024. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what about an audit? If I were to be audited for my protocol, what documents should I keep on record, like readily available for them to access?
That's a very good question. So consent forms need to be kept. That's why I've been managing the consent forms, because I know that there are multiple people on the project and sometimes consent forms are not always in the same place. So it's a really important, number one thing is making sure that you have the consent forms, you know where they are, because that's what they'll come after you on. As in the last 4 years, I have not been audited, but that's the number one thing, because every time you do a renewal, we have to put on their consent forms are all available for auditing purposes.
Thank you.
The other thing is to make sure that anybody who is on the research team is either on the protocol or you're tracking them in another way. So that's also really important. Yeah.
So when you were showing us that little KR screen, it said to close it, you want us to close it and then to press the request close. But does request close mean they're going to decide to close it, or does it literally close it?
That's a good question. They do not review it.
So it does, even though it says request, it's actually closed.
Yeah. Yep. I'm gonna actually show you a real, for those of you who've never seen the KR protocol site. I got Dr. Kelly's permission to share her protocol. It's easy, but there are a lot of things that people have additional questions on. So this is what it looks like. If you ever need to know what the review type is, it's right there. I like this handy dandy section where you have everything you need to know. The continuing, when you actually do a renew and amend, it won't show you the expiration date, so you gotta go back to the currently approved one to know what the expiration date is. When the protocol is about to expire, you start getting emails 120 days before it expired. They'll send you another one at 90 days and another one at 60 days. I recommend that you start the process at 120 days. And just start a renew and amend and work on it and submit it as soon as possible. Again, with the knowledge that you want to get it into queue and get them reviewing it and looking at it as soon as possible. You don't want to find yourself 60 days out or 30 days out. Yes.
People on Zoom have some questions.
Oh.
I think Alan put something in the chat. Can you see it?
I don't see the Zoom. Anybody here have questions before we get to the Zoom?
I have a question, Hannah. Thank you so much for the presentation. So my question is, if someone on the team, like whether it's a research personnel or a co-researcher, does not renew their city modules, and the protocol requires an amendment or a renewal, is it going to be a requirement before we renew the protocol, or we can just move on? Because then we need to wait for that person to complete their city modules, because it's going to be a rate limiting, step.
Yes, and that's happened many, many times. So if you need your renewal to be approved and you cannot get that person to do it on time, we've removed people. Because they will not approve the protocol until everybody on the study team has completed the training. So then the lead researcher sometimes will say, let's go ahead and get and this is, IRB is okay with this. Let's go ahead and get the IRB approved. And when they have their training done, we'll add them back in. Of course, that means that they cannot work on the study. They're not on the protocol, they cannot work on the study. So that's important for you to know.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Elsie.
Alan.
Oh, one other thing I'm sorry, I will get to Alex. One other thing that I wanted to add to that is the person does not have to have their city training completed for you to submit the protocol for review. So if they're working on it, you can still submit the protocol and let it sit in IRB review, but they won't approve it until the training is completed. So that doesn't have to stop you from submitting it. Okay, Alan's question is, do the PIs and research team track the patient enrollment demographic data? Not always. I think we used to do that, but we don't do that consistently right now. And the reason is that some of the studies are anonymous, and so people don't furnish that information. But if they are patients, UCI patients and medical records, and I put them into Encore for enrollment, for tracking enrollment, then we have that information already from the EPIC system. And that's why it's really important to put that medical care blurb into your consent form. We can start to do that though, Alan, if you.
That'll be great, because that'll be one of the major hangups for our NIH progress reports. We won't be able to submit it in ERA Commons in the system without the enrollment tables being done.
Yeah.
Right. So what we need to do is make amendments into the protocols to be able to collect demographics.
What demographics are required? Like,
Just the gender and race and ethnicity.
So for approval date, so it was approved June 21st of 2021, and then there's an amendment in June 2022, and it expires June 2024. What is the approval date? And if it was renewed, what is the approval date? Is it always the first date, or is it the most current?
The approval date is whenever they approve it.
Initial.
Yes, no, the new approval date, not the initial, the new approval date.
So if it was renewed if it was initial June 21st, 2021, but then we amended it in 2022, is that the?
Oh, I see what you're asking. I see what you're saying. Yes. So if you have the expiration date is always going to be 1 year from the renewal date. And even if you amend it in between, the date is still the same. The expiration date is still the same.
But what about the initial date though, with an amendment?
the initial date never changes.
Okay, so if the protocol was approved today and it expires in 1 year, then that is the expiration date. When you renew it on that expiration date, there will be a new expiration date.
But the initial date stays the same,
Yeah,
even with amendments.
The
The
initial
initial-
approval right here.
Yeah, the initial approval date, oh, I see what you're saying, yes, is always going to be when it was first approved.
But that
Now, this is
KR,
not gonna be
yeah.
the case for KR protocol. You can take that with a grain of salt, because that's probably the date that it was put into this system.
for sure.
Yeah. Brian, do you still have a question, Brian?
So, for the demographic information for NIH clinical study, so we have a protocol having access to the medical record and information will cover that.
Yes,
So it's, the problem is if you don't have any, if you're doing a study that's human subjects where you don't have any knowledge of the patient, then, that has to be modified. So
yes.
you're piercing the medical record at that point?
You're not piercing the medical record, you're asking for them to self-identify on a demographics worksheet.
Okay, so then we can avoid getting into the medical record by just asking them, like,
Right,
the NIH criteria.
right. And I forgot to mention that we also need the age, right, Ellen? We need the age as well. Or
Yeah,
the-
I think that's a brand new requirement from last year's age. And this is important. If we can't submit the progress report, that's gonna hold up your next year's funding.
You need the full date of birth, not just the year?
You need the age,
Age.
the age at the time of enrollment.
Okay, just the years.
Yeah, so we can just get the year.
So who's gonna keep the binders? Remember you had in my office and then you have the binders with information. So who's gonna keep those? Whoever takes your role or allows for the team?
That's really up to the PIs. If you want to leave them with the person who will replace me, then we can keep them in that office. If you want your lab manager to manage them going forward, let me know.
It should be secured, right?
It's secure, it's a locked room.
Ours is, but I mean, labs.
It has to be secure, so it has to be behind locked doors. You have consent forms because they have identifiable information on the consent form.
Are we gonna be able to download this somewhere? It's recorded,
Yes,
okay, because there's 3 people I want to hear have listen to it.
yes, it's being recorded and Richard and his team will give you access. Yes, Chris.
Instead behind locked doors, if you have a network attached storage that's has.
You're not storing them electronically, they're paper. I guess you could have an electronic one.
Consent forms are, for most of our studies, they're paper consent forms. At some point, maybe we can transition. I know there are other PIs across campus that do electronic consent forms. There's a lot more additional restrictions and things for that, of course, but it does reduce the administrative burden of having to track paper consent forms and have the risk of losing them.
How do we keep them electronic records secure?
Well, BLI has a secure server, so you can keep electronic records on BLI servers, they're secure.
That particular one, the particular clinical studies server, that,
No, they're all secure, aren't they?
I think the clinical trials.
that's, right, and it's like password protected, right?
Yeah.
I think you need it on a password protected server, which not everything is. I mean, our network is open, we don't have a
Yeah.
password for network, so.
Okay, we can figure that out.
Yeah.
There are also UCI health sites that you can put things that are secure. So you can also do that.
I saw you put DocSign as an option for the consent form. Do I need to obtain IRB approval or just automatically?
You need a IRB approval.
Oh,
Yes. Because there is a checkbox for electronic consenting. Right?
Do we have at Beckman HIPAA compliant cloud storage for anything?
Do we have a Beckman
Cloud, that's HIPAA compliant?
cloud?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge, no. No, I think that's health science.
yeah, UCI offers.
Yeah, they give you like 20 megabytes. No, I'm not joking.
Oh.
I'm not joking, yeah. So I'm just wondering, because, there's some patient data now going to clouds for like image processing, where, for example, you could take your iPhone and scan someone's face, and then it goes to the cloud for 3D reconstruction. And wow, that's fantastic. Why are you charging so much? And the answer is, because the cloud that you go compute on has to be HIPAA compliant. And I'm just wondering, I know like Dropbox and various other organizations have HIPAA compliance. I'm just wondering, in college of medicine or university, because this is all patient health information and it's probably traceable. So I like the idea of the lock and key because it's just easier than going to a cloud, but ultimately we're probably going to be on a cloud, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if that existed. Yeah. So do we want to think about that now?
That is probably something that you want to eventually
Does
explore.
13 one advantage, one more headache?
Yeah, that would be there too. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So say that my protocol has been approved by IRB,
Mhm.
and then I realize I need to add another person to the study team. How do I go about doing that? Do I have to amend the protocol? or-
Yes.
Oh,
You gotta do an amendment.
how long does it take more?
They'll tell you it'll sit in queue for 4 weeks
Mhm.
unless you expedite, you ask them to, I won't use that word, to rush it. Because, and they won't unless you have a really, really good reason. But, you know, doesn't hurt to try and doesn't hurt to ask. I've gone to analysts and I've said, the only thing that I've done is added this person. Is there any way that you can just speed it through? And sometimes they will.
It's not considered an administrative?
That's not an administrative.
But is she
No.
asking about the study team or is she asking about research personnel?
That's a good question.
Both.
If you're adding them to the study team, it has to go through the official IRB amendment review. And they have to approve it. But if it's somebody that you determine does not need to be IRB reviewed, then no, they don't review it.
Okay, and how did you say that we identify our analysts? You said it's in duality, right?
Activity log.
I see, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you can also see it under the admin notes sometimes for action item summary.
Okay,
You
excellent.
can open all of those, so yes. It's past the hour. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I will make sure that you have the PowerPoint with all of the links. And thank you.
Thank you.